the status quo, when this book is finally published, will say this is nonsense, this is rubbish. But my reply will be this. Every study, every academic study in the world which has any legitimacy is able to accept cross-examination of the assumptions on which it is based. So that we have different theories in physics, we have this theory being proved or disproved. But in the case of culture, and especially in the case of icons such as Mozart, there is no cross-examination, and there never has been. And that is the litmus test of whether or not this story is worthy of your belief. It isn't. And as soon as you examine things from more than one perspective, you have better understanding on them. And that's the reason why I've persevered with the writing of this book, not against Mozart, but against the underlying evils which have promoted him to the exclusion of many other musicians and composers for almost 200 years. Don't be fooled by this industry. It is a highly seductive industry because its fruits are so beautiful. They're very tempting. And you think, wow, this is... The fruits themselves are some of the greatest music ever written. True, but the story behind this will never be conceded by the conservatives. Never. And so please judge the work having read a biography, read standard biographies, and then also consider this aspect. And I think the two of them together will give you the chance to form your own judgments.
Right, and I think it opens up a door into an area that's quite important when understanding the control today of our society, both here both in your country and mine, and what we can do about it. Now, we may say right today that, well, the control is so vast that we have no choice but to succumb to them. I don't agree with that. I don't think you can succumb to evil. If you understand what evil is, you understand who they are, the natural thing to do is to fight against it if you have any kind of heart and soul in your body. And I think good Americans and good English and the good people of London and England will understand that. The real question becomes, are you willing to dedicate your life to understanding this, or are you willing to just follow the leader? And I believe they understand that most people will just follow the leader. But I think stories like this have a great importance because, just like I said, take the story of papal infallibility, folks. Understand the truth behind it, and all of a sudden, you've cut the Pope's knees right out from under him. He has no authority whatsoever. Yes. I believe that if you take Mozart's life and you understand the truth, you can cut the knees out from under the Hollywood industry and the music industry by understanding that they're controlling every word and thought you're going to the movies for, and demand that truth not take a back seat to this. I'm not opposed to education. I'm not opposed to entertainment. But I'm opposed to controlling people's minds through it. And if they can control how we view history, for example, what is wrong with if this music actually, well, it was written, why not just give credit where credit is due? I would love to see who these people were. Can you imagine if you had 10 or 15 composers, how this could have blossomed into better music, into basically something so beautiful that you take the control element out of it and you have a whole different history, not only for musicians, but for the world, don't you?
Yes, the part of the process. They say a professional musician will tell you, this music is definitely in the style of Mozart, and it's impossible for 15 different composers to be writing this music. But my reply is this: have you heard the music of these 15 composers? Mozart's music is distinctive. It seems to be distinctive, but that's only because they've removed from textbooks all of these people. Van Hal, Myslevicek, Lucchesi, names which are hardly known today. And this is deliberate, because the style of music at that time, which we call Mozart, was commonly shared by all of these composers to a very, very great extent. And so if you remove all of these people, then you have the one image of Mozart and his style, which seems to be completely unique. And this is another aspect of why these names were suppressed.
Right. I guess in your book you'll talk about this. There's a number of names here that I'm looking at of these musicians that have been basically struck from the history books. Now, the question becomes, back then, of course, we didn't have the mass communication methods we have today. Secrets were perhaps easier to keep. But what do you think was going on behind the scenes to keep these people quiet? Were they being paid, basically? And didn't they have any ounce of egotism to get their name out there as a great composer?
If you look at the list of these composers, most of them had a very strict religious background. Very strict. Jesuit educated, most of them, and obedient to the point of sacrificing their entire careers for the mission, for the glory of Rome, for the glory of the Holy Roman Empire, which had its base in Vienna. And so they were part of a project, rather like 9/11 or the people who committed these things were devoted to a cause, and that cause had the product. Its final end product was the control. They knew what they were doing. They had careers of their own, but their contributions to this project continued for years and even for decades in some cases. And some cases even rubbing out their own achievements so that they would be lost completely. If I can just take one name, Van Hal, V-A-N-H-A-L, Van Hal, almost unheard of today. You can ask professional musicians, have you heard of Van Hal? No, they've never heard of Van Hal. Van Hal was a next-door neighbor to Mozart during his entire Vienna career. Writer of more than 60 symphonies, remarkably similar to the music of Mozart, but nobody's ever heard of him. It's only recently that they've made some recordings of his music. So eventually the truth will come out. And Van Hal was a very important player in this story, along with nearly 20 other people.
Yeah, and you've listed some names here. One that comes to mind after seeing that movie Amadeus was Antonio Salieri. And I was wondering what he played the antagonist in that movie, the man who was being shunned. What did you find out about him?
Antonio Salieri was the senior musical person in Vienna during the lifetime of Mozart, during Mozart's career. Salieri was a devoted follower of the Holy Roman Empire, its sacred mission, and he was the teacher of various pupils who came to him. I haven't mentioned their names here. There are too many. One of them, oh yes, I have, Joseph Cartellieri. Joseph Cartellieri was a virtual slave of the musical system, unknown today. It's a strange thing, everyone's heard about Beethoven, but they've never heard of Joseph Cartellieri. It's interesting, because in 1795, the very first concert of Beethoven ever gave in Vienna was in 1795. And in that concert, along with Beethoven's music, was a symphony by Cartellieri, and it's forgotten today. It was hugely famous, but they quickly removed him because they had other plans, and he went to work for the next 20 years in editing Mozart's music before it was first published. Joseph Cartellieri, he was finally poisoned, but he died very young, Joseph Cartellieri, and his music is truly quite beautiful, and it's only the last 3 or 4 years that people have discovered his talent. Beethoven, meanwhile, has become the great icon, well, along with Mozart and Haydn. Cartellieri is one example of the lengths to which people will go to protect or to serve, to be enslaved by the system which Vienna really was at that time. To dominate music, Vienna, the city of music, built upon the foundations of these iconic composers. The
And
whole story.
I'm sure nothing's changed. I mean, if you look, he's probably paid well, and just basically
yes,
worked for the Vatican back then, thinking he was doing something right. And there are many people like that today.
Yes.
And I could name names, but I'm not going to, because it's the same things exist today as it did then, just in a different manner. And I think the stakes are higher today. We're looking at a chance now for the Illuminati to control the world, something they think they have a birthright to, and the Vatican. Go ahead.
I remember on the morning, that terrible morning of 9/11, here in London, I was in another part of London on that day, and I was in a hurry, and I was going to take a bus into the centre of London, and there was a lot of people gathering around the televisions, in an electronic shop, and I watched those horrible, tragic hours as a British person, and I was almost speechless. And next to me was an architect watching the same images through the shop window, and he said to me, that's impossible. He said his eyes were full of tears. England, we were just devastated by this. He said that is mechanically impossible.
Yeah.
That an aircraft could have, and everyone here in England, our hearts were just torn by these images. He said, I've been an architect, a designer of buildings for 30 years, and I tell you there's something wrong with all of this. And this was within minutes of the transmissions, it's staggering. It's honestly, we are living in such a deceptive age, really. We really are living in the most deceptive age, I think, perhaps of all time. And I just mentioned that because deception and robbing people of the truth, this has to end, and we just have to assert our sovereignty, as Christian people, and give the fruits of our research, whatever it is, my small area.
And exactly. I mean, every piece of information from all areas helps to put this story together.
Yes.
And since you mentioned 9/11, let me just say this quickly, that I dedicated a couple years of my life to writing about it and researching it and bringing researchers on who looked at this story from a criminal crime scene. And the way it was handled, the physical evidence that was covered up, the eyewitness evidence that was covered up, shows the great tragedy and the great deception going on in the American government. Now, what's happened with the truth groups here in America is that they've been infiltrated by the Jesuit order.
Yes.
Because they understood that Americans many would not buy this story. Now, what they've done is they put their people in to control exactly where the investigations go. And although many people understand that 9/11 was not the way it was depicted by their government, and people around the world, in England and America, millions of them know this, many of them have never gotten to the point of who really did it. The story that we're talking about today, the connections to Rome, the connections of our government, how this has much to do with the same thing they did in your country in 1605 when we talk about the gunpowder plot.
Yes.
But people don't even understand what that is.
Sure. Well, just a few weeks ago, I was watching here in London the images of that aeroplane which came down to land on the Hudson River. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
This Hudson.
Right.
But the strange thing about it was, if you follow the tape, those people are walking on the wings of that aeroplane within 20 seconds of it hitting the water. You have a look closely at that. Okay. There's something not right about this. Now, what they were doing with that plane came to rest right opposite the very place where the investigations of 9/11 were based from. And I thought to myself, there's something strange about all of this. How can you evacuate a plane within 25 seconds of it hitting the water? There's something very strange. But if you come back always to the media and to the mass media, are we ever getting the truth of anything? And so it's wonderful to share with other people on whatever we do. I'm just a writer on music history, but to share with other people on the scale of the deception of the mass media, it's truly breathtaking.
Yeah, it is. And 9/11 was a perfect example of how this